They laughed at me like I was the family's inside joke. At the reunion, my father raised his glass, boasting about my brother's new firm, then sneered, "And she thinks she's a lawyer." Laughter roared around the table. My law degree, the years of sacrifice, reduced to worthless paper in their eyes. But what they didn't know was that I had already won a case so explosive it would change everything. One verdict that would flip their pride into shame. By the time the truth surfaced, their mocking voices would be the echo of their downfall. It was 2 a.m. when the phone rang, slicing through the fragile silence of my apartment. I didn't need to check the caller ID. My mother's voice trembled on the other end, laced with practiced desperation. "Sweetheart, I hate to ask, but we're short on money again. Just a few hundred this time. Your brother's car broke down, and he needs it to get to work. You understand, right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Even half asleep, I reached for my wallet, as though it was instinct carved into my bones. That was the story of my life. Family first, always. Family loyalty was supposed to be sacred, but what no one told me was that loyalty without boundaries becomes a leash. I thought I was being a good daughter, holding everything together, but in reality, I was a resource, a safety net they exploited without guilt. Looking back, it felt like I had been groomed for this role since childhood. Every time I hesitated, they reminded me, we're family, and family sticks together. Love became a bargaining chip, and guilt was the currency. Psychologists call it trauma bonding, the twisted chemistry that makes victims cling to their abusers, confusing control for care. When my mother cried, I felt responsible for her happiness. When my father sighed, I felt compelled to fix his disappointment. I was drowning in obligations that never ended, yet they convinced me I was free. Gaslighting was their favorite weapon. Whenever I expressed exhaustion, they accused me of being selfish. "We gave you everything," my father would remind me. "Is it too much to ask for you to give back?" My sacrifices, long hours at work, sleepless nights, my dwindling savings, were invisible. They praised my brother's achievements, while mine were reduced to background noise. The narrative was always the same. I was the one who should be grateful, even while I was the one holding everyone up. I once knew a woman named Claire, a colleague at law school. For 15 years, she supported her parents and siblings financially. She believed, like I did, that love meant sacrifice. But when she couldn't keep up with their demands, they cut her off, sold the house she'd helped pay for, and excluded her from the will. She lost her family and her savings in one swift betrayal. Listening to her story should have been my wake-up call, but I convinced myself my family was different. I told myself I was safe. I was wrong. Because the truth was, the worst betrayal hadn't even happened yet. The signs were always there. I just refused to see them. If you've ever wondered whether your family might be toxic, there are patterns almost every victim ignores until it's too late. First, there's financial manipulation. You're always expected to pay, to cover, to give. But when you need help, suddenly no one has anything to spare. Second, emotional blackmail. The tears, the guilt trips, the silent treatment, each crafted to keep you obedient. Third, gaslighting. You're imagining things. We never said that. Fourth, isolation. They subtly discourage you from trusting outsiders, so the only voices you hear are theirs. Fifth, information control. Keeping secrets about money, about wills, about decisions that affect you but never include you. Sixth, constant criticism masked as advice. We only want what's best for you, they say, while tearing down every accomplishment. And seventh, exclusion, the cruelest of them all. I'll never forget the night of my cousin's birthday. Photos began flooding social media. The whole family gathered around the cake, laughter frozen in pixels. I wasn't there, not because I didn't want to be, but because I hadn't been invited. Later, I discovered they had a group chat, everyone except me. "It's easier without her," one message read. That was the moment my chest tightened so hard I thought I couldn't breathe. Exclusion isn't just absence, it's erasure. It tells you you're not family, you're disposable. The psychological fallout of years like this doesn't fade, it festers. Victims internalize the belief that they're unworthy, that no matter how much they give, it will never be enough. They second-guess their worth, their instincts, their memories. Even in moments of success, the voice of the family whispers, "You're still not good enough." That voice becomes a parasite living in your mind. If you suspect you might be in a similar trap, ask yourself these questions. Do I feel guilty when I say no? Do I give more than I ever receive? Do I feel excluded from decisions or celebrations? Do I constantly explain myself only to be told I'm overreacting? Do I feel drained after every interaction, as if my energy has been siphoned away? If your answer is yes to more than one, you may be caught in the same cycle I was. And here's the truth. Once you recognize it, you can't unsee it. The facade shatters, and every interaction feels different, darker, realer. Because once you realize your own family is the one hurting you, nothing will ever be the same again. The reunion was held in my uncle's sprawling backyard, white lights strung across the trees, music humming softly. I had forced myself to come, believing for once, maybe things would be different. I dressed neatly, smiled politely, and carried the hope that tonight my family might see me as more than their scapegoat. But hope is a fragile thing. My father stood at the center of the table, glass of wine in hand. He beamed with pride as he announced my brother's promotion at his firm. Applause followed, and I clapped too, though my hands trembled. Then, with the same casual cruelty he had perfected over the years, my father added, "And she thinks she's a lawyer?" He pointed toward me, his smirk slicing me open, while laughter rippled through the crowd. In that moment, my body betrayed me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my glass. My heart pounded like it wanted out of my chest. My face burned with humiliation. Part of me whispered denial. He didn't mean it. It's just a joke. But another voice, sharper, louder, insisted, "No." He meant every word. Anger surged through me, so foreign yet so undeniable, that I gripped my chair until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't the first time they had cut me down, but this time the cruelty was public. There's a different sting when the people you love mock you in front of witnesses. It reminded me of the night I was taken to the emergency room after collapsing from exhaustion. I called my family, desperate for comfort. No one came. Later they told me, "We thought you were exaggerating." Another time, on my birthday, I discovered they had celebrated without me. The photos neatly tucked away in a private group chat I wasn't part of. The message was always the same. You are less. You are disposable. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the brutal clash between the story you've been told and the reality in front of you. My story was supposed to be simple. Family is forever. Family loves unconditionally. But reality screamed otherwise. They didn't protect me, didn't value me, didn't even want me there unless I was giving them something. That inner conflict was tearing me apart until the laughter at that reunion shattered the illusion completely. I sat frozen, staring at their faces as they chuckled, their eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of putting me back in my place. My father raised his glass again, but his words blurred into a haze. All I could hear was the roar of my heartbeat, the whisper of my own mind repeating, "This is the truth, this is who they are," and I knew then, knowing the truth was only the beginning. That night, I drove home in silence, but something inside me had shifted. The ache of humiliation still throbbed, but beneath it lay a strange, cold clarity. I couldn't change them. I couldn't beg them to love me differently. But I could change how I played the game. For years, I had reacted emotionally, crying when they cut me out, pleading when they demanded more, collapsing under their guilt. But what if I stopped reacting? What if I started observing, documenting, strategizing? I forced myself to detach, to study them as if they were subjects in a case. I began small. I recorded conversations, nothing dramatic, just their words, captured in the raw tone they later denied. I combed through financial records, tracing transactions my parents swore didn't exist. I watched their patterns, who called when they needed money, who lied to cover for another, who shifted the blame. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in their chaos. I was gathering evidence. And then, one night, buried in a folder of old documents, I found it. Proof of a hidden account under my father's name. One my brother had quietly accessed. Money that should have gone toward shared family assets had been siphoned away. They hadn't just taken my loyalty, they had taken what was mine. The betrayal had been deeper, longer, and colder than I ever imagined. Yet instead of breaking me, the discovery sharpened me. Each lie uncovered was no longer a wound. It was a weapon. Each betrayal became a piece of the puzzle. I was no longer the powerless daughter they mocked. I was a strategist in training, learning to move silently, deliberately, waiting for the right moment. The shift in me was almost frightening. I still felt the sting of their cruelty, but it no longer consumed me, it fueled me. I had stepped from the role of victim into something else entirely. And in that transformation, one truth crystallized. The game had changed. I was no longer their pawn. When the laughter at the reunion finally faded from my ears, I made a choice. I would no longer confront my family with tears or pleas. I would confront them with truth, preserved in undeniable form. Evidence, not emotions, would be my weapon. I started with what I knew best, documents. My father's desk had always been cluttered with paperwork, his filing cabinets crammed with receipts and contracts. He assumed no one else cared enough to look, but I did. On quiet nights, I scoured old bank statements, highlighting strange transfers, patterns that suggested money was vanishing into accounts I had never heard of. The amounts weren't massive at first, just a few hundred here, a few thousand there. But when you stitched the years together, it was a fortune. I recorded conversations on my phone, casual remarks that revealed more than they realized. My brother boasting about investments he couldn't explain. My mother slipping about a loan she had sworn never existed. I saved every message, every email, every contradiction. At first, it felt like betrayal, like I was invading their privacy. But then I remembered they had invaded my life for years, carving it up for their benefit. This was not betrayal. This was survival. One case burned in my mind. A friend once told me about her aunt who had funded her parents' home for decades. When the will was read, her name was absent. Every asset, every dime, had been redirected to siblings who never lifted a finger. She had no evidence to fight back, only memories of promises whispered in kitchens. She lost everything. That story haunted me and fueled me. I would not let my family erase me with ink and signatures. But evidence was tricky. Not every recording is admissible. Not every email counts in court. I researched tirelessly, learning what was valid, what could be thrown out. Secret recordings, legal in some states, useless in others. Financial trails, ironclad if authenticated, but vulnerable if mishandled. It was a minefield, and one misstep could destroy everything. I forced myself to remain detached, to treat my own pain as though it belonged to someone else. Still, there were nights I couldn't hold back. Reading my father's signature on a hidden account, realizing my own money had been siphoned without consent, I broke down, sobbing until dawn. But even then, I returned to the files, steadier. I was learning to bleed and build at the same time. And then came the moment that froze me. Among the piles of bank records and notarized documents, I found a contract with both my brother's and my father's names. Together, they had signed over assets that were partially mine by law. They had stolen from me, not in whispers or shadows, but in ink that could not be denied. But there was another kind of proof, stronger than signatures, stronger than numbers. And I was about to discover it. I knew I couldn't fight alone. The battlefield wasn't just legal. It was emotional, psychological, relentless. To win, I needed allies. The challenge was discerning who truly stood with me and who only pretended, who were loyal and who were flying monkeys, eager to serve my family's narrative while appearing sympathetic. The first person I confided in was my therapist. She listened quietly as I played a recording of my father dismissing me as dead weight. Her calm eyes didn't flinch. "You're not crazy," she said simply. Those 3 words were a lifeline. In a family built on gaslighting, someone believing me felt like oxygen. Next, I reached out to a financial advisor, one who specialized in forensic accounting. He confirmed my suspicions. The missing money wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. His expertise transformed my piles of paper into a coherent narrative, one that could stand scrutiny. I wasn't without personal allies either. My best friend, who had seen me crumble more times than I cared to admit, offered her home as a sanctuary. And then there was my aunt, my father's sister, who quietly slipped me a folder one evening. Inside were letters, receipts, photographs, proof that she too had been cut out, manipulated, betrayed. She had remained silent for years, but seeing me fight gave her the courage to add her voice. "They've been doing this for decades," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Even the digital world became an unlikely refuge. Online forums filled with strangers shared eerily similar stories. Families who siphoned inheritances, siblings who turned on each other, parents who weaponized guilt. Their words stitched a community around me, strangers reminding me that betrayal in bloodlines was not rare, that justice was still possible. For the first time, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. I was no longer the lone daughter screaming into the void. I was a strategist with a growing army, each ally a thread in the web I was weaving. And with allies came strength, with strength came patience, and with patience came the moment I had been waiting for. the time to strike. Because now, with evidence in my hand and allies at my side, I knew the war had only begun. And this time I would not lose. Revenge, I learned, is not fire. It is ice, cold, precise, patient. The question was never if I would reveal the truth, but when. Timing was everything. A poorly chosen moment would make me look bitter, unstable, vengeful. The right moment, though, would shatter their facade beyond repair. I waited. I smiled through dinners, answered their shallow questions with polite indifference, and allowed them to believe I had folded back into their control. But inside I was calculating birthdays, holidays, reunions, all stages set for maximum impact. The opportunity came at my cousin's wedding. The family was gathered in their finest clothes, the air heavy with perfume and champagne. My father held court at one of the round tables, telling stories about my brother's brilliance. My mother beamed beside him, and my brother basked in the glow of borrowed admiration. I watched quietly, knowing that in my bag rested a flash drive loaded with everything: documents, recordings, photographs. When the music softened and the microphone passed around for toasts, my hands no longer trembled. I stood, my glass raised, and for a moment, silence draped over the room. To family, I began, my voice steady. The people who are supposed to love us, protect us, and honor us. But what happens when family becomes the thief in the night? Gasps rippled. My brother laughed, trying to dismiss me, but the screen behind me flickered to life. The first slide appeared, a bank record signed by my father, with transfers into a secret account. Murmurs erupted. Then came audio, my brother bragging about covering up those transfers. The dominoes fell in sequence, evidence layered upon evidence, each piece reinforcing the last. By the time the recording ended, the hall was no longer festive. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was written across every shocked face. The silence was deafening, broken only by my father's voice. "This is nonsense. She's twisting things. She's always been unstable." His words were met with stares that no longer believed him. I placed the microphone down, my job complete. But revenge does not end with revelation. It only begins there. Because I knew their reaction would be brutal, the fallout came swiftly. My brother launched the first counterattack. He flooded social media with posts painting me as a jealous failure, desperate for attention. My father reached out to extended relatives, spinning the story of an ungrateful daughter who twisted evidence to destroy her own blood. My mother called daily, sobbing, begging me to retract everything for the family's sake. They deployed every weapon they had: denial, gaslighting, smear campaigns. Flying monkeys, family friends who had always worshipped my father, came after me online, questioning my sanity, inventing scandals about my past. They tried to isolate me, just as they always had, but this time I was ready. Every move they made, I had anticipated. I had secured legal counsel weeks earlier. My attorney filed restraining orders where threats crossed the line, and drafted defamation suits for the most dangerous lies. My financial advisor secured my accounts so they could no longer siphon from me. My therapist reminded me of my anchor, steadying me when the noise threatened to overwhelm. And when they tried to flood the internet with their narrative, I countered with precision. I released carefully curated pieces of evidence, never all at once, never too much, just enough to dismantle their lies one by one. It was death by 1,000 truths. Every denial they made was answered with proof. every smear met with receipts. Their credibility collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. I thought of another story I had read once, of a woman who exposed her father's fraud at a family reunion. He tried to silence her, calling her unstable, but she had prepared a press release and had allies ready to spread the truth. His smear campaign died within days, smothered by the weight of public evidence. Her story had inspired me, and now I was living my own version of it. The harder my family fought, the deeper they sank. By the time the dust began to settle, they were no longer the untouchable figures of my childhood. They were exposed, fractured, desperate to contain. A storm that was already too big to control. And me? I was not broken. I was not silenced. For the first time, I stood firm in the center of the storm, watching them scramble as the truth tore down everything they had built on lies. After the chaos, silence returned, but it was no longer suffocating. It was liberating. Because after every storm, the air clears, and in that clarity, the truth shines brighter than ever. Karma rarely arrives on its own. Sometimes it needs a push. For years, my family operated in shadows, confident their lies and manipulations would remain hidden. But when the evidence surfaced, financial records, signatures, recordings, the world no longer looked away. Lawyers moved in. Subpoenas were issued. Suddenly, the family name that once commanded respect in our town became a headline dripping with scandal. The newspapers called it a betrayal of blood. My father's carefully crafted reputation as a successful businessman crumbled when investigators confirmed he had hidden assets and funneled money through accounts in my brother's name. My brother, once hailed as the golden child, faced charges of financial misconduct and fraud. The lavish lifestyle he flaunted online was revealed to be funded by theft. Even my mother, who had positioned herself as the heart of the family, was forced to admit she knew more than she had claimed. The consequences were swift. The bank froze accounts. Business partners cut ties. Friends who once filled their house for parties vanished overnight. Social invitations disappeared, leaving behind a silence more punishing than any insult. In the eyes of the community, they were not victims of my cruelty. They were perpetrators caught in their own web. I thought of the woman who once lost her inheritance because she had no proof. Her tragedy became my fuel. Now, watching my own family stumble under the weight of their exposed corruption, I felt something unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. Validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't bitter. I was right. That satisfaction deepened when other voices began to rise. One by one, relatives, old friends, even former employees reached out to me. They too had stories: money taken without repayment, lies spun to cover selfish acts, betrayals swept under rugs. I was not the first victim. I was simply the first who refused to stay silent. Together, we formed a chorus of truth, each testimony another nail in the coffin of their denial. The law moved at its deliberate pace, but the verdict in the court of public opinion was already decided. My family had spent years crafting a facade of unity, pride, and achievement. In a matter of weeks, that illusion collapsed. Their downfall wasn't just legal or financial, it was social. They were ostracized, stripped of the admiration they had weaponized against me for so long. Yet as I stood in the center of their unraveling, the satisfaction I felt wasn't revenge in the fiery sense. It was colder, steadier. It was the kind of justice that doesn't roar. It whispers, "The truth wins." And yet, I knew the deepest satisfaction was still ahead, because justice is more than punishment. It is freedom. For the first time in my life, I didn't wake up dreading a phone call demanding money or a message dripping with criticism. My mornings belonged to me. I brewed coffee without anxiety gnawing at my chest. I walked outside without the invisible leash of guilt pulling me back. This was what liberation tasted like: quiet, ordinary, but miraculous. Rebuilding my self-worth was not instant. Years of being told I was less did not vanish overnight. But with each boundary I set, my confidence grew. I changed my number, cutting off the midnight pleas. I blocked relatives who only reached out to manipulate. I no longer explained myself or begged for understanding. My voice, once drowned in their noise, grew louder, steadier, until it became my own again. The impact rippled outward. My story spread through friends, then through online communities. Strangers wrote to me, saying they saw themselves in my struggle. Victims of toxic families, of betrayal, of gaslighting. They told me my fight gave them courage to confront their own chains. What had once been my private shame became a beacon for others. For the first time, my pain had purpose beyond survival. Justice wasn't only about exposing my family's lies. It was about rewriting the narrative, proving that victims could rise, that silence wasn't the only option. Every person who found strength in my story was a victory far greater than watching my family squirm under the weight of their consequences. Still, I reminded myself this journey wasn't finished. Justice had given me freedom, but freedom was only the beginning, because beyond justice lies something even greater: the power to create a new life untouched by their shadows. And that was the chapter waiting for me next. Freedom is fragile unless you defend it with boundaries. I learned this quickly after the storm settled. My family still tried to claw their way back into my life, weaving the same tired strings of guilt and obligation. But this time I cut every thread. I went no contact with my father and brother, their numbers blocked, their emails filtered to trash. With my mother, I kept a threadbare line, low contact, nothing more than polite updates that revealed nothing of my life. It was not cruelty, it was survival. Financially, I sealed every crack they once slipped through. New accounts, new advisors, passwords locked behind layers of security. I no longer co-signed anything, no longer lent a cent, no longer carried the weight of helping that only hollowed me out. Emotionally, I drew sharper lines. If someone mocked me, dismissed me, or drained me, they lost access. My time, my heart, my peace were no longer theirs to exploit. Privacy became sacred. I tightened my digital presence, erasing traces they once used to monitor me. Social media turned from a window into my life, into a wall of curated distance. Physically, I moved to a new apartment across town, one they didn't know the address of. I finally understood. Boundaries were not walls of isolation. They were gates of protection, letting in only those who deserved to stay. I thought of a woman I once met at a support group who had walked away from a family that drained her for decades. She rebuilt piece by piece, a new job, new friends, a small home filled with plants and books. She told me, the day I locked my door and knew no one inside was hurting me, that was the day I began living. Her words became my mantra, and with each new boundary I drew, I felt myself beginning again. With these boundaries, I realized A new chapter of my life had truly begun. The future, once clouded with their shadows, now gleamed with possibilities I had never dared to imagine. With financial freedom, I finally invested in myself. I opened a small law practice dedicated to protecting victims of family exploitation, those who, like me, had been gaslit, drained, and erased by the people meant to protect them. Each case I took wasn't just a job, it was a vow. No one else would face their monsters alone. My career flourished, not because I sought glory, but because my purpose was sharp, authentic. Journalists who once wrote about my family's downfall now wrote about resilience, about justice, about the woman who turned betrayal into advocacy. For the first time, recognition didn't sting, it felt earned. But success was not only professional. Personally, I began to breathe again. My health improved. I slept through the night without dread curling around me. I picked up old hobbies, painting, running, even singing in a local choir. My creativity, once smothered under constant criticism, blossomed in unexpected ways. I even allowed myself to love, cautiously at first, with someone who didn't see me as a tool or a burden, but as a partner. Breaking the cycle meant more than just saving myself. It meant stopping the poison from passing to the next generation. I spoke at universities, at community groups, teaching young people how to recognize manipulation, how to protect their boundaries before it was too late. Each time a student told me, "I saw my own story in yours," I felt the ripple widen. Pain was no longer an inheritance, it was a warning. And through me, that warning became power. I once believed my legacy would be silence, a life spent in the shadows of their control. But standing here now, I see my true inheritance: strength, clarity, resilience. My family's cruelty forged me into someone who could rise, and in rising, I left the cage wide open for others to escape too. Looking back, I don't regret the war. I regret the years I let them convince me I was powerless. But regret doesn't define me anymore. Hope does, faith does, empowerment does. I survived the betrayal of blood, the erosion of trust, the storm of lies. But survival is only the beginning, because today I am not just surviving. I am truly alive. I am reborn.